Henry Calder discovered two wolves nearly frozen solid, pressed together beside a leaning tool shed. One was visibly pregnant. The male had stretched himself over her, using his own body as a shield against the storm, though both were barely clinging to life. The female lifted her head a fraction, her eyes dulled by exhaustion, the small motion carrying a silent request for help. Without intervention, they wouldn't survive much longer. The storm intensified by the minute, and Henry understood he had almost no time. This wasn't simply about saving two predators, it was about protecting a family. What came next would challenge the boundary between caution and compassion, turning an ordinary farmhouse into the setting for something extraordinary. The late January blizzard had struck with brutal force, racing down from the Alberta plains into eastern Wyoming. The wind howled fiercely enough to knock a man sideways. At 71, Henry had endured countless harsh winters, but this one felt different, more vicious, less forgiving. Standing at his kitchen window as snow swallowed the fence lines, he knew he had to check on the cattle before conditions worsened. "Just the cattle," he muttered, pulling on his thick, insulated coat. Elaine would have smiled at that. Talking aloud had become habit since she'd passed 4 winters ago. A quick check, then back to the warmth. The moment he stepped outside, the wind struck like a punch, flinging icy needles against his face. He pulled his wool scarf higher and pushed toward the barn, his flashlight barely slicing through the swirling whiteout. The cattle were fine packed together under shelter, chewing calmly as if the chaos beyond the walls didn't exist. But as Henry turned to head back, a sound stopped him cold. It was faint, nearly swallowed by the wind, but it didn't belong. Not wood. Not weather. He stood still, listening. Then it came again. A thin, broken cry drifting from near the abandoned equipment shed. Henry knew the sounds of his land during storms. This wasn't one of them. He fought through waist-deep snow toward the noise, finding a shallow depression where a rusted plow blade formed a small barrier against the shed. His flashlight beam swept the snow, then froze. 2 wolves lay tightly curled together. Their thick coats were crusted with ice, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. The larger male had positioned himself outward, taking the full force of the wind to protect the smaller female. Henry's breath caught. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. He'd only ever seen wolves like this in wildlife magazines, silent hunters from distant ranges. They didn't belong here. And yet, they didn't flee. They couldn't. The female lifted her head slightly, pale green eyes locking onto his. In them were fear, exhaustion, and a clear plea. That's when Henry noticed her rounded belly beneath the frozen fur. "Oh Lord," he whispered. "You're carrying pups." The male attempted to rise defensively as Henry approached, but his strength failed and he collapsed back into the snow. Henry knew time was nearly gone. Without stopping to think, overthinking had never been his way. Henry shrugged off his coat and knelt beside them. "Easy now," he murmured, using the same steady tone he'd used on nervous livestock for decades. "I'm not here to hurt you, but we need to get you warm." The female released a soft, breathy sound, something close to surrender. Henry gently slid her onto his coat, surprised by how light she felt. She was far too thin for a pregnant wolf. The male resisted weakly at first, then seemed to understand that fighting was pointless or that this human meant help. The journey back to the house was brutal. Using the coat as a sled, Henry dragged the heavy wolf step by step, while the wind battered him relentlessly. By the time he burst through the back door into the mudroom, he was shaking and gasping nearly as hard as they were. He didn't pause. He knew sudden heat could be dangerous. Carefully, he eased them into the living room and settled them on the braided rug near the wood stove, not close enough to scorch, just warm enough to thaw slowly. With trembling hands, he reached for the landline. Elaine had insisted they keep it for emergencies exactly like this. Wyoming Fish, Wildlife, and Parks answered. "Wildlife emergency," Henry said. "I've got 2 wolves. They're badly frozen. The female's pregnant. I brought them inside." There was a long silence before the woman on the line. Dr. Sofia Rodriguez responded, calm but clearly stunned. She guided him carefully, warned them gradually, offer water only if they could drink on their own, no food yet, keep the room dim and quiet, watch closely. Then her voice turned serious. "Mr. Calder, you need to understand wolves are extremely powerful animals, especially when offspring are involved." Henry glanced at the male wolf, now curled tightly around his mate, thick tail wrapped protectively around her. "Ma'am," Henry said quietly. "These wolves are barely alive. And even if they weren't, I buried my wife 3 years ago. I've lived most of my life already. If helping them is how I go, there are worse ways." Silence followed. "We'll come as soon as the roads open," she said at last. "Probably not until morning." "Then I'll stay with them till morning," Henry replied. And he did. Henry pulled his recliner closer and kept watch through the night. He warmed water and offered it in a shallow dish, relief flooding him when first the male, then the female managed to drink. He found unused guest towels Elaine's and tucked them gently around the wolves. Slowly, signs of life returned. The shaking eased. Breathing steadied. The male whom Henry had begun to think of as Shadow lifted his head and fixed Henry with a calm, assessing gaze. Not threatening, just aware. "I know," Henry murmured. "I know. Strange house. Strange smells. A strange old man speaking softly. But you're safe here," Henry said aloud. "All of you." His eyes lingered on the female's rounded sides. "Every one of you." He had started calling her Luna. Even weakened and exhausted, she carried herself with quiet dignity like royalty refusing to bow. Around midnight, Luna shifted. Her breathing deepened, uneven and strained. Shadow reacted instantly, pressing closer. Henry's stomach dropped as realization hit. "Oh no, not now," he whispered, already reaching for the phone. Even as he dialed, he knew help wouldn't arrive. Whatever happened would happen here in his living room with only him to bear witness. Dr. Rodriguez answered on the second ring. "I think she's going into labor," Henry said. "All right," she replied calmly. "May I call you Henry?" "Give her space, but stay close enough to intervene if needed. Wolf mothers are capable, but stress and exposure complicate things. Have clean towels ready. Keep the room warm, not hot. And Henry, just stay with her. Sometimes that's enough." What followed became one of the most unforgettable nights of Henry's life. Luna labored through the dark hours before dawn. Shadow never left her side. Henry sat nearby, speaking softly about the ranch, about Elaine, about the night years ago when he and his wife rescued a box of freezing barn kittens during a storm much like this one. The first pup arrived as the wind outside finally began to ease, a tiny, wriggling form that Luna immediately cleaned with fierce devotion. Then another, and another, and another. 5 pups in total, an unusually large litter for wolves. Everyone alive, everyone whole. Shadow carefully sniffed each pup, as if counting them, before settling his powerful body into a protective arc around his family. His massive paws rested near the newborns with astonishing gentleness. Henry watched, tears streaming freely. He had seen this before, life pushing forward against impossible odds. During calving seasons after cruel winters. In Elaine's eyes near the end, when she squeezed his hand and told him to keep going. And now here, on his living room floor, in the fragile lives of creatures who had trusted him completely. Morning arrived pale and quiet. The storm had finally spent itself. Henry dozed in his chair, waking to soft, high-pitched sounds. The pups were nursing, lined along Luna's belly. Shadow's eyes were open, watching Henry steadily. It almost looked like gratitude, though Henry knew better than to name it. A knock came just after 7. Dr. Rodriguez stood on the porch with 2 wildlife officers, their truck somehow having pushed through the snow. She was younger than Henry had imagined, her kind eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. "How are our patients?" she asked. Henry led them inside. The moment she saw the scene, she stopped short. "Oh my," she whispered. "Wolves, and 5 pups." She crouched slowly, careful not to startle them, observing from a respectful distance. "They're in remarkable condition, Mr. Calder," she said softly. "This is truly rare." What followed unfolded with practiced precision. The rescue team moved in smoothly, unloading insulated carriers, warming pads, and medical kits. Each animal was handled with deliberate gentleness, heart rates measured, temperatures checked, identifying marks recorded. At last, Dr. Rodriguez turned toward Henry, her expression serious. "These wolves don't belong to this area," she explained. "Their species originates from the high plateaus of Central Asia. See the marking inside the ear? That's a captive, breeding tattoo." Henry's brow furrowed. "They were released," she continued, "illegally. Either someone believed they were setting them free, or they abandoned animals that became too much to manage. But captive raised wolves don't know how to survive, especially not in winter. and certainly not here. Henry exhaled sharply. They wouldn't have made it. Not through the night, she confirmed. A surge of anger rose in him. Who would do something like that? Unfortunately, she replied quietly. It happens more often than people realize. The wolves were carefully prepared for transport. Luna and her newborns were placed together in a large, heated carrier layered with soft blankets. Shadow was secured in another nearby, positioned so he could still sense his mate and pups. Henry lingered by the doorway, unwilling to let go just yet. What happens next? He asked. They'll be quarantined and observed, Dr. Rodriguez said. After that, they'll be transferred to a licensed sanctuary. They can't return to the wild, but they'll live safely, comfortably. Because of what you did. Henry nodded, his throat tight. Then he paused. Wait, he said, turning back inside. He returned, holding a faded quilt one. His late wife, Elaine, had stitched years earlier, patterned with mountains and night skies. For them, he said. Something warm, something that smells like home. Dr. Rodriguez accepted it with a nod of deep respect. We'll keep it with them. Henry stood in the snow and watched the vehicle fade into the white distance before heading back into the quiet house. Even with the fire burning, the living room felt strangely hollow. The spot on the rug where Luna had given birth carried a weight that silence alone couldn't explain. Weeks passed. Dr. Rodriguez sent regular updates. The pups, 5 of them, were thriving, growing stronger each day. Shadow had recovered well from surgery. Luna remained a fiercely attentive mother. The family had been placed in a permanent home at a large wildlife sanctuary, living in an enclosure designed to mirror their native cliffs while educating visitors about conservation and the dangers of illegal exotic ownership. Photos followed. Henry printed them at the local library and pinned them to the refrigerator with Elaine's old magnets. Luna curled around her pups. Shadow standing watch, tail wrapped neatly at his feet. The pups' eyes newly opened, stumbling across their enclosure on oversized paws, curious and fearless. Spring arrived the way it always did in Wyoming, sudden, bright, and full of renewal. Henry thought of the wolves often as he tended his land. The quilt had been returned once the family settled in. Luna had used it for the pups' first nest, Dr. Rodriguez explained, but no longer needed it. The fabric still carried the faint scent of wild fur and something else. Gratitude, maybe. Hope. In May, an envelope arrived with the Wildlife Department's seal. Inside was an invitation to visit the wolves at the education center. They remember kindness. Dr. Rodriguez wrote by hand. Shadow still watches for you. And Luna has taught the pups to trust, carefully. You should see what you helped save. Henry made the drive on a quiet weekday morning. Dr. Rodriguez greeted him and led him to the habitat, a sweeping space of stone ledges and shaded dens, built to resemble distant mountain ranges. Large viewing windows allowed visitors to observe while learning about responsibility and coexistence. Shadow noticed him first. The big wolf stopped mid-step, stared, then released a sound Henry had never heard: a soft, breathy greeting. Moments later, Luna emerged, followed by 5 nearly grown pups, all legs and confidence. They know you, Dr. Rodriguez whispered. They've never reacted like this before. Henry stood still at the glass. One pup, bolder than the rest, approached and pressed both paws against the window, pale eyes locked onto his. Henry lifted his weathered hand and rested it gently against the glass. He remembered the storm, the fear, the miracle of new life born where it shouldn't have been. Thank you, he murmured. He wasn't sure if the words were meant for the wolves, for Elaine, or for whatever force had guided him into the storm that night. Driving home, Henry felt something unfamiliar: peace. Completion. He had spent his life caring for land and livestock. But this had been different. This had been about recognizing need over fear, about opening a door when it mattered most. That evening, he sat by the fire, the quilt resting across his knees. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where something extraordinary had happened. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. Emily, he said when his daughter answered in Calgary. It's Dad. I need to tell you about something incredible that happened this winter. You won't believe it, but I've got photos. And as he began with a blizzard and 2 freezing wolves, Henry realized something deeply true. Saving Luna, Shadow, and their 5 pups hadn't only saved them. They had saved him. They reminded him that life continues, that compassion matters, That even in the harshest storms, hope can arrive quietly, carrying the future on silent paws. The wolves went on to become ambassadors for their species, teaching thousands about conservation. But to Henry Hale, they would always be something more. They were the family who came to him in a storm, who trusted him with their most vulnerable moment, who proved that as long as there is breath in your lungs and kindness in your heart, you still have something meaningful to give. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around his house, Henry would look into the snow and remember Shadow's steady eyes, Luna's quiet strength, 5 fragile cries of life, and the night when choosing compassion changed everything. Did this story move you? If you were in Henry's place, would you have opened your door, yes or no? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.